Okay, good morning everybody. Trumas Parak Test Mishnah Aleph. Hazareya Truma Shegig Yoifach. A kohen is allowed to eat, drink, or smear Truma on his body, but he's forbidden to plant it like the Mishnah says in Shvius and Parak Ches Mishnah Beis. If someone did plant seeds of Truma, that which grows from them is Chulin, according to the Torah. Midaraisa. Since regular Tevel may not be eaten before Trumas Amaisis is taken off the Chacham, however, with Geyser, that whatever grows from Truma must be treated as Truma, therefore it's always forbidden to a Zor, to a non-Kohen. As I state in Gemara Shabbos, the Chachamim were concerned that if the growths of Truma would be treated as Chulin, a Kohen who has Truma that's Tameh, which is required to burn, he might be tempted to plant it because then he could sell the growths at the full value of Chulin. While he waits for the planting season, however, a member of his household may forget that the Truma is Tameh and eat it. So today that this shouldn't happen, the Chachamim were Geyser that the growths of Truma are also Truma, may not be eaten by a non-Kehanim or Kehanim or a Tameh. This reduces their selling price so greatly that a Kohen won't see the benefit to plant this field with Truma, rather he would plant a regular crop instead. The Mishnah discusses what's done with the field where he did plant Truma. So as a Rea Truma Shegig, if someone planted Truma by mistake without knowing it was Truma Yoifach, he may turn over the soil with a plow to destroy the growths. The Mishnah doesn't mean that he's obligated to plow the field and destroy the growths of Truma, rather, he's permitted to do so. He's not considered to be destroying Truma, which is usher to destroy. Amazed, but if he planted Truma knowingly, Yekayim, he must maintain the growths and not destroy them. Because even Midrabanan, it doesn't have the Kedusha of Truma until they reach 1/3 of the full growth, which is a general rule in Zroim when things grow. Nevertheless, even before that stage, since they potentially have the status of Truma, a field of such growths can be described as a field of Truma. The Rabbana therefore decreed that the growths may be maintained, because destroying that would look like destroying Truma. However, a field in which Truma seeds were planted by mistake doesn't even seem like a field of Truma, since the planter himself was unaware that he was planting Truma. It is therefore permitted to destroy the growths in that case. Im hevier shlish, once the growths have reached 1/3 of their full eventual growth, then he must maintain them whether he planted the Truma by mistake or b'mezid, because once the growths have reached 1/3 of their full growth, the midrabanan is considered Truma now, and forbidden to destroy anything that has Truma in it. Uba pishtan, and in the case of flax that's Truma, mezid yoifach, even if it was planted knowingly, the soil must be turned over to destroy the new flax. This chiv applies even after it has grown 1/3. Only something that's eaten or drunk or applied to the body can become Truma. Therefore, the seeds of flax plant, which are sometimes eaten, can be designated as Truma, but the inedible stalks cannot be designated as Truma. In our case, though, where the stalks grew from seeds that were already Truma, the stalks themselves also become Truma just like the seeds. However, people might not realize that the stalks are Truma. Rather, they'll assume that the stalks are Chulin, as is usually the case. To prevent people from making this mistake and wrongfully benefiting from the Truma stalks, the Chachamim were Geyser that one must plow over the field in order to destroy them. Although this is an act of destroying Truma, the Chachamim were matir this destruction of Truma in order to prevent people from using it shalakidah. Okay, Mishnah Beis. V'chayeves beleket b'shichlo b'peo. Although the Rabbanim were Geyser that produce grown from Truma has the kedusha of Truma, this is true only in that it's also to non-Kehanim. In all other areas, it's treated like Chulin. And the next two Mishnayos will clarify the Prate halachas of how exactly that works out. So, a field in which Truma was planted is mechuyev leket shicha and peah, even though the regular halacha is that Truma is pater from leket shicha and peah. Since the produce of this field is Truma only midrabanan, it's not pater from the chiyuvei and mitzvahs deraisa like leket shicha and peah. V'aniyeh Yisrael v'aniyeh kehanim alaktim, and both poor Yisraelim and poor kehanim may gather leket shicha and peah from this field. But the Aniyah Yisrael Meichen Ashalahem LaKehanim B'dmei Truma. The poor Yisraelim, who may not eat the produce because it's Truma Midrabanan, have to sell to the Kehanim, but only for the lower price of Truma. V'adamim Shalahem, and the money they receive from the sale is theirs to keep. Truma sells for much less than Chulin because there's a much smaller market for those who can eat Truma. Midrabanan, a non-kain, is forbidden only to eat the Truma that grows, but he may have hano from it. Therefore, poor Yisraelim who gather leket shicha and peah may sell them to a kain and keep the money. But since these items may be eaten only by kehanim, they are sold for the lower price of Truma. Reb Tarfon says leilaktu elaniya kehanim. Reb Tarfon says that the Rabbanan were Geyser that no one may gather leket shicha and peah from this field except for kehanim shem yishkechu v'yitnu l'seich peah. The poor Yisraelim are also to go into this field to collect lekach shechan peh, because they might forget that it's truma and eat it by mistake, and they'll be over and eating truma. According to Reb Tarfon, the Chachamim considered it necessary to prohibit non-Kehanim from gathering lekach shechan peh in the field of truma for fear that they might eat the truma. The Tanakama, however, holds that no such gzera was ever created, either because the produce is truma only midrabanan, or because non-Kehanim can be trusted that they won't eat it because they're used to not eating truma anyways. Rabbi Kiva said to Reb Tarfon, if that's so, the Israelim are not allowed to gather produce in the field of truma leilaktu ela tahirim. So then Kehanim too should only be allowed to gather unless they're tahor. Not when they're tamei. A kohen who's tamei should be treated like Israel, since a tamei kohen is also forbidden to eat the truma drabanan. Yet we don't find any isser against the tamei kohen gathering in this field. So therefore, there should be no isser against Israel doing so either. It's just interesting that Reb Tarfon was a kohen, Rabbi Kiva wasn't. It's interesting that Reb Tarfon is saying this halacha. If the Chacham had considered it necessary to forbid Yisraelim to gather produce in the field of Truma, they would also forbid Tamei Kohanim from gathering there. So, in view of the fact that Tamei Kohanim are allowed to gather in the field, it follows that the Chacham never asked Yisraelim to do so. Reb Tarfon would respond by arguing that there's a difference between Yisrael and a Tamei Kohen. Yisrael might unthinkingly eat the Truma he's gathering, but there's no such concern in the case of a Tamei Kohen, because Kohanim are generally much more careful in the halachas that apply to the Kohanim specifically. As we know, Kohanim Zizumim, which may apply specifically to the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash as part of the Gemara and Zvachim, but in the halachas which they keep, which are miyuchad for the Kohanim, so they're taka extra careful about. Mishnah Gimel, v'chayavis b'maisos v'maiser oni. This field is mechuyev in maiser, in regular maisos, maiser rishon, maiser sheni, and maiser oni. Since it's tevel midaraisa, they have all the chiyuv deraisa. This din d'Rabbanan, this gzera d'Rabbanan doesn't have the kech to override the chiyuv deraisa of maisros. V'aniya Yisrael, v'aniya Kehanim noitlan. Both poor Yisraelim and poor Kehanim are allowed to take the maiser oni. V'aniya Yisrael meichon shalem like Kehanim b'dmei truma. And the poor Yisraelim may not eat it because it is truma midrabanan, and they may sell their Kehanim, but only for the lower price of truma. V'adamim shalahem, and the money they receive from the sale is theirs to keep. Hachayvet meshubach. The Mishnah will explain now how the grain that grew in a truma field should be threshed. So hachayvet meshubach, someone who beats the seeds out of the grain with sticks, is more praiseworthy than one who threshes it with an animal, because one is forbidden to let his animals eat growths of truma. Threshing is the process of separating the kernels of grain from their stalks and husks. The Mishnah deals with two methods of threshing. One is to spread the stalks of grain on the floor and have animals, such as oxen, walk over them. The other is to beat the stalks with sticks. Using animals to thresh growths of truma presents a halachic problem. On one hand, the non-kohen may not let his animal eat truma because the halacha against eating truma asks it not only to the Yisrael himself, but also to his animals. He would therefore have to prevent his animal from eating truma. However, minat Torah is also to prevent an animal from eating the produce it's working on. So in order to avoid this problem, the Mishnah teaches that it's better to thresh the truma with sticks than with animals. But if one wishes to thresh the grain using an animal, what should he do? How does he prevent it from eating the truma without being over in the Issa Deraisa against muzzling animals when they are threshing? You should hang a basket from the neck of the animal and put into them animal food of chulin from the same species that one's threshing. So he's neither muzzling the animal, since he could eat the food from the basket, nor is he feeding truma, since he's providing chulin of the same min instead. The reason why you give it that specific food to eat, l'chaira, is because the animal has a taiva to eat that one. When he sees that one in front of him, that's what he's going to want to eat. So you give him that same one, so he doesn't have a taiva to look for other things, he'll be able to eat that which he's working with, and not be over on either isser. Mishnah Dalet. Gidule truma v'gidule gidulin chulin. The growths of truma are treated as truma, but the growths of truma are chulin, which is mutter to everyone once mice has been taken off its regular tevel. As we explained in Mishnah Aleph, growths of truma are forbidden to non-Kehanim according to the Rabbanon. However, growths of other types of forbidden produce are permitted even midrabban avalat tevel. If someone planted tevel, which is food that no trumas or mice were taken off of at all, mice rishon that trumas mice has not been separated from, or sviche shvias. Svichin are after growths that grew on their own during Shemitah from seeds that fell during the previous year's harvest, as we discussed in Sech the Trumas, Shvias. Utrumas chutz la'aretz, or truma that grew outside of Eretz Yisrael. Min ha'Torah, the chiyuv of truma ma'aser applies only to produce that grew in Eretz Yisrael, but the Chacham extended them to nearby countries like Mitzrayim, Ammon, Moab, and Bavel, like the Mishnah says in Yadayim. If one were to plant truma separated from the produce of those countries, the growth should be permitted even with the Rabbanah. The Chacham didn't ask them because truma is relatively uncommon in those countries, where most of the landowners are not Jewish. Meduma we discussed earlier in this Masechta is a forbidden mixture of truma and chulin, vabikurim, or bikurim, which are the first ripe fruits from each of the Shivas Haminim which you have to bring to the Beis HaMikdash. They have the same kedusha as truma, and being that they're limited to the Shivas Haminim, they're not as common as truma. Gidulei and chulin, their growths are ordinary produce, which after it's been gemaisered is permitted to everyone. Gidulei hektish u'maiser sheni chulin, the growths of hektish u'maiser sheni are also chulin, but you must be paid to them. Paida oisam bizman zara, though one may redeem them for what they were worth at the time of their planting, even though they are now worth far more. Although the new growths are chulin, one is rabbinically obligated to redeem them. However, the entire crop may be redeemed for the price of the original hektish u'maiser sheni that was planted. For example, if one planted a saw of grain that's hektish u'maiser sheni, and now 10 saw grew, he can redeem 10 saw for the price of 1 saw. Mishnah Hey. Meya leginu shel truma v'acha shel chulin. The seeds of most species of plants decay in the ground, and an entirely new plant grows in their place. However, there are some species, such as the onion, whose seed is a bulb, which does not decay, but expands and gives rise to new bulbs. The Mishnah draws a halachic distinction between these two types of produce with respect to the halachas of planted truma. So, meya leginu shel truma v'acha shel chulin. If 100 rows of truma and 1 row of chulin were planted in a field, and it's not known which row is chulin, kulan mutarim b'davar shezare kala. All the rows are permitted to non-kahanim in the case of a species whose seed decomposes in the ground. B'davar shezare kala means that the zera, the seed, gets finished up, which means it decomposes. Since the seed has decayed, and no part of the original truma is present in the new growth, the chachamim were mekel, and they were mapped to the produce in all the rows, even though most of the rows were planted with truma. B'davar she'ein zare kala, but in a case of a species like an onion whose seed does not decompose, even if there were 100 rows of chulin and 1 row of truma, all the rows are forbidden to non-kahanim because part of the original truma is still present. There's much more of a chumrah in the zera, which is ein zarei kala, which the chachamim saw to it that because it's still around. So, Masha Enken B'davar Shazari Kala, there's a kula that even if there's a taruvas or a suffix, will be mekel B'davar Shazari Kala as opposed to Davar She'en Zari Kala. Mishnah Vav. Hatevel Gidul of Mutarim B'davar Shazari Kala. We learned that before tevel is fully processed, it may be eaten casually as a snack, but after its processing, it may not be eaten at all until all trumas and maisa have been separated. We also learned that if processed tevel is planted, although the tevel itself may not be eaten at all, this issue does not extend to its growths. Rather, the growths may be eaten as a snack, like all other newly grown plants. As in the case of planted truma, this kula too applies only to certain species. Tevel gidul of mutarim b'davar shazarei kala. In the case of processed tevel that was planted, its growths are permitted to be eaten casually, only if it's a species whose seeds decompose when planted. But if it's a species whose seeds do not compose when planted, even the growths of its own growths are completely forbidden because part of the original tevel is still present in them. What are species of whose seeds do not decompose? Luf, garlic, and onions. According to some Mafarsham, luf is a type of onion, but others learn that it's a type of bean. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hashum kasa'orim, garlic decomposes like barley. No type of planted grain decomposes more quickly than barley. Thus, when arguing on the Tanna Kamma's opinion that garlic doesn't decompose when planted, Rabbi Yehuda compares it to quickly decomposing barley to emphasize his point that replanted garlic does in fact decompose. According to this, Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kamma disagree whether the seed of garlic decomposes or not. This seems odd because this question can easily be determined through investigation. Right? So Metzias does it or it doesn't, and so maybe there are different types of Metzias or different types of earths, different types of things decompose differently, but the Pashtas, the question should be about the seed itself. Mishnah Zayin, the final mission of the parak. The previous Mishnah taught that if someone plants processed tevel of a species whose seed does not decompose, such as luf, shum, or betzalim, onions and garlic, The new plants are also even for casual consumption, just as the plants of Tevel were. The following Mishnah addresses the question of whether this restriction applies to even the land owned by a goy in Eretz Yisrael. If a yid is weeding a field that was planted with bulbs of processed chasiyos, a category that includes luf, onions, garlic, and other species whose seed does not decompose, with a goy in the goy's land in Eretz Yisrael, aval pisha peros of tevel, even though the goy's produce is tevel, oichel me'am arai, the yid may eat from the growths casually, because any produce that was processed by a goy is tevel only midrabanon. Since the tevel of these planted bulbs themselves is only the rabbanon, so the chacham were mekel in regard to their growths and allowed them to be casually, meaning that the chacham were mekel by this din rabbanon. Shesile truma shenitmu, young plants of truma that became tameh. Shesilin are young plants that are plucked from the ground and replanted in another place where they can grow to their full potential, like nursery plants. So shesile truma shenitmu, they became tameh. Any plant that can be eaten, like cabbage and leeks, are capable of becoming tameh because they're food. However, they're not considered food while they're still attached to the ground. So mechubla karka it won't become tameh. It's only after they're picked that they're considered oichel and they can become tameh with tumas oichlin. In this Mishnah's case, the plants were already edible when they were picked the first time. So after being processed and designated as truma, they became tameh. So truma that's tameh may not be eaten even by a kohen. So shoslan tarum elatame. If you replanted them, they become tahar with regard to transmitting tumah to other things. When the tameh plants are replanted, they become attached to the ground and they lose their status as oichel, because now they're mechubal karka. At that point, they also lose their tumah because something that's not food cannot become tameh. When it's attached to the ground, it's not food yet. Nevertheless, they must still be treated as tameh to some degree, as the Mishnah will go on to explain. They're forbidden to be eaten even by a kohen until it cuts off the edible parts of the plants, leaving only the inedible cores and roots. Once the edible parts regrow, they may be eaten by kohanim. Although these truma plants were clear to their tumah when they were replanted, and should thus be permitted to kohanim, the chachamim answered them because they applied to a maila bat truma. To protect the special sanctity of truma, they decreed that these plants do not become completely tahor through being replanted. Rather, they become tahor only insofar as they can no longer contaminate other things, but they remain tameh insofar as they may still be eaten by kohanim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheyogam v'yishna, the plants are forbidden until he cuts off edible parts, and then once they've regrown, does so again. Only that which grows after the second cutting is going to be mutter to kohanim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the maila bat truma that they did was much more chomer, that even after the kohen had cut off the edible parts and allowed new ones to grow in their place, he must cut off the new growths, and he may eat that which grows after the second cutting.